Hear me now? I think you could hear me anyway, but it's not that big a room. But I really make an argument for doing more transformational innovation as opposed to just incremental change, which is what most of us end up doing. Sorry. There we go. So I wanted to start with this quote from my favorite futurist, Arthur C. Clarke, who said, "No communication technology has ever disappeared, but instead becomes increasingly less important as the technology horizon widens." And I think all of us that are in the ad tech, martech business understands that we are tied to media, basically to get our message across, and that underlying media is constantly changing. So we started with print and radio and TV and outdoor, all static, multi-billion-dollar businesses. But as we've gone interactive, that landscape is changing at a very, very rapid pace. So it started with the telephone. Our parents probably remember getting spam on the phone, and it's all come back today on our cell phones. But what's happening on connected cars and even wearables affect the way that we deliver marketing messages to consumers. And as these technologies come about, it has a profound impact on the effectiveness of advertising. So if you think about ad spend, of course, everybody reads the eMarketer reports, $330 billion of marketing spend. And for the first time in 2019 globally, digital has surpassed traditional. Now, if you really dig into that, the rate of change is even more alarming than what meets the eye. We talk about, in the US, digital is 51%, but TV is still the other 49%. But the rate of change and the rate of innovation is happening at a much more rapid level. And as the younger demographic basically tunes out of broadcast television and they're looking for OTT video experiences, the underlying medium and the effectiveness of advertising and reach is going to fundamentally change. So you have to, this is going to be a fun presentation. You have to acknowledge that this is a digital first and a mobile first trend. There we go. Okay, so everybody knows about the dominance of Facebook and Google, and it's actually pretty interesting to see, right? Google has benefits from over $100 billion of ad spend that shows up on their platform. Facebook, $62 billion. If you think about when they went public, that was 5 years ago, they had $0 billion. So in 5 years to have gone to this level, it's faster than any other company in terms of sort of $0 to $50 billion. But even though those guys really dominate the space, 23% of ad spend happens elsewhere. And even though sometimes Google is involved in that in terms of the search waterfall or even display advertising, there's still a lot of innovation that can happen outside of that ecosystem. Social. This is another reality. I think about at our last gig at Opera MediaWorks, we used to try to convince media buyers that social was not brand safe, right? That you were going to, like Coke was going to see their ad show up in the feed next to something unsightly. And that was just complete BS, right? Because social works, the audience is there, the eyeballs are there, the data is there, and this trend is going to continue. I put the TikTok logo at the bottom here. 500 million users. 500 million users, and potentially a ton of ad spend that's going to start to show up on that platform. Okay, now it's going a little too fast. So there's also this debate that all the privacy concerns that's happened, the leaks, the problems that Facebook and others have had, is really going to stem the flow of the preponderance of advertising that shows up there. I actually take a very contrarian view to that because even though there's lots of privacy legislation, GDPR in Europe, we're going to switch.
Yeah, apparently. Just a green button.
Great. Thank you. What many of you may not see yet is the California Privacy Act, which really takes GDPR to a different level. And it's just like the emission standards. What California says pretty much is going to affect every other state in the United States. And you see what Apple's doing, right? They're using privacy now as a marketing mechanism because they understand that their real competitor isn't Samsung, it's Google. And this is their hedge against trying to keep Google in their place. Now the giants, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons, they are not going to be affected badly with GDPR. They retooled their user agreements. The fact that the consumer consents and they have the ability to walk away if they don't agree is the ultimate defense for the big guys. But many, many, many private companies, including, I would argue, some people in this room, have their head in the sand. The difference is, there's all these articles in MarTech press that says, GDPR is really overblown, and really not a big deal. But we have to fundamentally understand that, Europe is not a litigious society. The US is, and California sort of redefines what it means to go after companies at a class action level. And that's going to affect ad networks, it's going to exchange the exchanges, the DMPs, because fundamentally, if you don't have consent from the user and you're collecting data, either directly or indirectly, you're going to be in violation of statutes of the CPAA. So my view on this is that this is fundamentally going to change the way that consumer data is managed, and it's going to affect the way we do targeting, measurement, attribution, audience management, all the things that ultimately fuel our industry. Another hot topic is artificial intelligence. And when we talk about AI as it relates to marketing, we're really talking about machine learning. We're talking about deep learning in terms of neural networks that will actually learn and optimize, and natural language processing for interaction. So this is going to drive a brand new frontier around the building blocks of MarTech, which is profiling, audience creation, audience management, personalization, and ad optimization. But to really fully realize the potential, we've got to think about this as like a forklift upgrade. It's not incremental change. And that sea change is probably not going to happen very quickly, but when it does, it will change the way that we look at and manage data. So when you combine the innovation in AI and these potential speed bumps with privacy, it actually represents the biggest opportunity as an industry for us to retool the marketing stack. And I think that startups that embrace this are really going to have breakout opportunities. Attribution. You think about the problem is that there are too many companies that stand up and take credit for causation for some event that happened with the consumer. And there's still way too many voices, and the loud voices like the Facebooks and Googles always win out because they tend to absorb the majority of spend. And we got to have trusted third parties that can really elevate their position in the market to say this. And I think companies like Everflow have a big opportunity here to reset that stack and to establish themselves as a leading trusted third party. Messaging, this is where I spend a decent amount of time. Messaging had a lot of potential, right? So at the dawn of the internet, you had email, and there were a lot of successful companies that built tools for reaching consumers via email. But a fundamental lack of security and trust has really destroyed this ecosystem. Even though there's billions of dollars still being spent on email, the effectiveness is really, really not good. 50% of email today is spam. And it just makes all of us not want to pay attention to our inbox. SMS, again, ubiquity, right, was very appealing. But again, it's too limited, 160 characters. It's tolled still, right? We still have to pay the carriers to send an SMS message. The same issue with the lack of trust. So of those consumers that have a choice of using an OTT service like WhatsApp or WeChat, they'll choose that over SMS every single time. And that's really telling. And just the ability, the financial services industry is running away from SMS because phishing attacks for them are now more prevalent on SMS than it is on email. But I think there's a second coming of messaging. And the reason is that there are 4 billion people that every single day use one of these OTT messaging services. And even though some of these are very regional, there's innovation happening every day. If you think about like Alexa Show and the ability to really have an interactive messaging experience on that device, it's going to open up lots and lots of opportunities. And the trends here, just like digital, maybe even steeper, is that these OTT services are taking off. There's more daily active users on these messaging platforms than any other media, including social media. So to put this in context, WeChat, which really kind of started this conversational commerce revolution, in 2018, $250 billion of commerce happened on WeChat. So to put that into perspective, PayPal globally, their total volume of commerce, and that's everything from eBay to like your merchant that uses PayPal for checkout, did less than half of that. So this is a huge economy that may not have presented itself in the US yet, but it's coming. This is a good example of where the rubber meets the road today. So on Facebook, you can buy these ad units, which are called click-to-messaging ad units. So unlike your typical experience where you see an ad in the feed, you click on it, your browser opens up, and you have your typical web landing experience. Instead, you land into a messaging surface. There isn't as jarring a contextual switch, and you're leading that consumer through a conversation, which is all about the brand journey. Our experience has been that on A/B testing, a click-to-messaging experience can deliver 2x the conversion rate than a click-to-web experience. And marketers talk about storytelling, right? Digital has been a big boom in terms of helping brands tell their story. But what better way to tell that story than through a conversation? So it's better acquisition, lead generation, it's better ROI on ad spend, it's better purchase funnel management, and it's better audience segmentation. Another hot topic is blockchains, cryptocurrencies, and e-commerce, right? There are parts of the world where this stuff is very, very fertile, just typically not in what we think about as first world markets. Blockchains are clearly proven technology, right? There's lots and lots of industries that are adopting it. It's here to stay. But the cryptocurrencies that we've been exposed to, things like Bitcoin and their competitors, really have not scaled. And a lot of it is because of the underlying mechanism that drew value into these Bitcoins came from illicit means. And that, at a regulatory level is constantly at odds with each other. But there are serious problems with e-commerce today that, a credit card or a debit card really doesn't work well for a transaction under $5. The merchant friction, the interchange fees, it just doesn't make sense. And the App Store payments, again, if you're dealing with licensed content, just the interchange economics doesn't make it work, right? If you're paying Google or Apple 30% of a transaction and 40% has to go to a license holder, it just doesn't work. And I think that the Supreme Court deliberation about that is going to have some big impact on the industry. But we still need a cryptocurrency that works at global scale. I think the giants are working at this. You probably heard about what Facebook is doing with their cryptocurrency. I think it's going to be interesting. It'll probably not be perfect the first time out. But all these other companies also have a vested interest. They're all working towards something like that. And ultimately, an efficient cryptocurrency will actually increase commerce and make it easier for marketing-driven commerce to happen in a more frictionless way. Challenges with innovation. So coming back to the broader topic, we've seen real innovation, particularly in the MarTech space, happen at the startup level, right? Because ultimately, startups are inspired by inefficiency. But the fact that we mint millions of startups and only 6% of them basically survive and thrive. And ultimately, a successful startup, the business model, particularly in our space, is about solving an industry pain point and trying to differentiate yourself from the pack. Now, here's a challenge, right? Great startups get acquired. Here. It's definitely an event to celebrate. But what my experience has been that acquisitions ultimately kill innovation. And acquirers, particularly the big companies, are really notoriously bad at retaining leadership and the top talent because there's too much bureaucracy. Just the big company dynamics typically turn away entrepreneurs. Here's a few examples, right? In the mid-2000s, Yahoo bought Right Media. Right Media was a beautiful platform for programmatic buying and RTB. And Yahoo felt like it was such a threat that it basically ground it into the ground and made it disappear because their traditional way of selling media was extremely profitable. You look at companies like Where, the first location-based ad network, eBay bought them. Basically, they disappeared. Companies like Crux, these are newer acquisitions, Blue Kai. In these big companies like Salesforce and Oracle, they're not getting enough oxygen to innovate, and that's an issue. So a cautionary tale, right? Even if you've got great solutions and your partner gets acquired, it's time to think about what's next. So I want to leave you with a more positive note that I think that there are opportunities abound. And if you look at some of those areas that I talked about, AI, messaging, and payments, at that intersection is a real opportunity. And I think many of us were very, very surprised what happened post the iPhone in 2007 and this multi-billion-dollar app economy that's emerged. But But I believe that when you think about these sort of building blocks, we'll see a new economy, and one that really can benefit the marketing world, that will make the app economy look small in comparison. So that's my spiel. Happy to take any questions or cover any other topics that you guys want to.
Can you comment on the regulatory aspect of crypto? You mentioned like big giants are working on it, and if the original versions were obviously largely being driven by money that was illicit, how would the current one be, how would the current one be different from a regulatory perspective? Because isn't it almost a threat to existing currencies, and Federal Reserve would have a say in it and so forth?
Yeah, and I think you got to take baby steps, right? I think what Bitcoin tried to do, because it absolutely addressed the pain point, but it dove into the sort of the deepest end of the swimming pool with the regulatory issues of basically creating a new currency. I think what you'll see, particularly what Facebook is talking about doing, will not be a new realm of the coin. It will still use a dollar-based currency, but it will let you engage in microtransactions with a fee structure that's very different to electronic payments today. So I think that the way to get society kind of conditioned to this is not to get to 100 miles an hour, but you got to get up there. Maybe you got to be at 15 miles an hour for a while before you get to 50 and 75 and 100. But I think the other opportunity is there is talk in markets like India, which are in a banking revolution, right? That we're going to have more electronically banked customers in India than any other country in the world. Those guys might actually be the first out the door in a alternate currency, simply because the current currency and the inflationary risk that the currency holder has is so heavy that the motivation to go to a new realm of the coin is pretty strong. And it'll be really interesting to see how those emerging markets evolve.
Could you expand a bit on the 2x conversion that you were expressing of kind of more conversational or
Yeah.
messaging type versus click?
So I'm glad you asked this question, because I think it's one of these things that really kind of get glossed over. So if you think about an ad click experience and a click to web experience, what we try to do is get that consumer to give us some information that drives re-engagement. So we ask for an email address, we ask for a phone number, or some registration. But that's the biggest speed bump for a consumer, right? If they're not really bought into the value proposition, they're likely to just click around before they commit to giving you information. The beauty of click to messaging is that when you click into that messaging surface, you have all the ability to reach back to that consumer. They haven't given you any information, but the way that this works, particularly on Facebook, is that Facebook puts up a little bit of gray text that says, by clicking on this, you're agreeing to share your public profile with this brand. And with that is also that link that, since you started that journey with that brand has the ability to reach out and touch you as a consumer without having an email address or phone number or other details. So just that back channel, the fact that when the funnel freezes, the ability to unfreeze it by nudging that consumer, just that simple fact is what drives that dramatically different conversion.
And so it's a 2x conversion over the span. In other words, it could have been a conversion right away when they clicked on the ad, or it could have been a conversion over the span of the next month as you're re-engaging that customer.
Exactly. So think about in the email marketing world, we talk about drip campaigns, right? So the drips in messaging works the same way. It could be an hour drip, it could be a 7-day drip, it could be a 30-day drip. But it's all about driving that conversion. And then once you can apply some machine learning to that, you start to really optimize, right, those drips. They don't have to be so manual. They can be customized to that cohort that you're trying to engage.
Very cool. I did some of the examples on your website actually on the way here to get a little bit of that. So yeah, very cool.
Thank you.
So you're saying to apply machine learning for now, but how it is supported now? So like I understand when you click to website, you don't need the customer support sitting on background. But if it's click to message, do I need to have hundreds of people 24/7 sitting and responding to customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like in our approach, we try to drive as much automation in these interactions. But if it's a very high dollar purchase, for example, let's say it's a car, it's always helpful to have a call center in waiting when the consumer needs it. So for example, a 30-something consumer that's looking for a new car, they're very, very comfortable with self-service, right? Even if there's a little bit of a hiccup in how they interact with that brand, they're pretty forgiving. Someone who's 55 is not, right? They want, like, their sort of zone of comfort is more human. And our philosophy is just support that live handoff to a human being when needed, when it's economically feasible. But don't make the consumer have to figure it out. Like, it should happen just as you're messaging. Instead of talking to a machine, you're talking to a human, and it's a seamless transition.
All right, thank you.
And just to give you a sort of ballpark view, we manage about 1 billion interactions a month. Less than 10% of them are handed off to a human being. So the vast majority of it happens via machine.
Hi, I wanted to touch base on CPAA versus GDPR. So a year and a half, there was a lot of rumors when that was introduced in Europe that it's going to follow up in US. Yet, that's okay. Yet there's more and more states being added to the sports betting and real gambling in US. What, 5, 6 states now?
Absolutely.
So how do you think CPA will affect that? Is it going to slow down the process?
I actually don't think so. I think that the betting issue, there's still this issue of like know your customer threshold, right? I think that that's going to exist devoid of privacy legislation. But I think that the commonality there is just the ability for the consumer to be involved in that disclosure. That's the biggest issue with CPAA, is that what the government of California has said is that there's too much that happens behind the scenes in terms of their identity and that information.
It's interesting because there's none of the states in California that allow real gambling.
Yes.
So they are trying to regulate states on the East Coast. Because, for example, when it comes down to even Google, they just allowed pay-per-click
Yep.
on search about 2 weeks ago for real gambling
Yes.
in New Jersey, for example. So I just, do you have any comments on that in terms of how California is trying to regulate other states?
I think the fact is that because there's 40 million people that live in California, it's the largest state in the union.
They just allowed mushrooms as well.
But what applies there is by de facto implication going to affect everybody else. Because companies are just not going to say, oh, I'm just going to handle this in California, because the internet is virtual, and quite
Global
often,
effect.
yeah, you get the global effect.
Yeah.
Also, it was a ballot initiative, not a government action. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, so it wasn't like government said, "Hey, we want to do this." It was actually an engineer was talking to a real estate investor at a party, and the engineer was like, "Oh yeah, I know everything about you," and the real estate investor was like, "Great." So now he went and he got all his rich friends to put a ballot initiative on the California ballot, and now it passes through.
But is that actually a legitimate? Is that a regulation?
Yeah,
that
well,
is-
it becomes a regulation in California, but then to his point, because California is so big, if you're going to do it in California, you have to do it everywhere.
All right.
And the biggest implication is that it applies to companies that do business in California.
Yeah.
So
There we go. All right. Thank you.
okay, well, thank you. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you.